Welcome back now for the news in detail. We start from Iran, which has said US bases and aircraft carriers in the Gulf are within striking range of its missiles. In an interview, Revolutionary Guards Air Force head Brigadier General Amir Ali Hajizadeh said Iran is ready for a full-fledged war. Hajizadeh said after a US drone shot down its assets in Qatar, Iranian missiles have been targeting the UAE and the Sea of Oman. He added that Iran would have hit those targets if Washington had shown a reaction after the incident. Meanwhile, Iran has dismissed US accusations that it was behind drone attacks on Saudi oil installations. Earlier, the US blamed Iran for leading attacks on Saudi oil plants that have cut the kingdom's output roughly in half. Foreign Ministry spokesman Abbas Mousavi said Washington is seeking excuses to attack Tehran. He said such fruitless and blind accusations and remarks are incomprehensible and meaningless. Meanwhile, Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif said, having failed at maximum pressure, the US is now turning to a maximum deceit. He said the US and its allies are stuck in Yemen because of the illusion they can win war by weapon superiority. US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said Tehran is behind nearly 100 attacks in Saudi Arabia. Pompeo said Iran has now launched an unprecedented attack on the world's energy supply.
Iran destabilizes this entire region. It supports proxy militias and terrorist groups. It is an arms dealer to the Houthi rebels in Yemen.
Earlier in a phone call, President Donald Trump offered Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman support for his country's self-defense. Still in Saudi Arabia, where the shares have plummeted 3% at the start of trading today, the market slump came after drone strikes claimed by Houthis hit the kingdom's major oil facilities. The Arab world's largest capital market shed over 200 points in the first few minutes after the opening bell. The stocks recovered somewhat from the first session losses later. The key energy sector plunged over 4.5%, while the telecom and banking sectors each slid 3%. New Delhi has arrested and exiled over 4,500 locals from Indian-occupied Kashmir over the past month. Srinagar police say the arrested Kashmiris have been moved to jails in different states of India. The occupied valley's Shopian district tops the list with over 40 civilians detained under controversial Indian Public Safety Act. The people of occupied Kashmir have been looking for their missing relatives who have been detained since 5th of August. Meanwhile, Nobel laureate Malala Yousafzai has called upon the United Nations to work for peace in the occupied territory. The activist said stability in the valley will allow children to go back to their schools and resume their education. New Delhi's curfew in Indian-occupied Kashmir has entered its 42nd day. Now in the United States, Sikhs and Austrians in Houston have taken out a truck rally against India's illegal annexation of occupied Kashmir. The protesters condemned gross human rights violations by Indian forces in the occupied valley. The rally moved through the roads and streets, driving trucks decorated with flags and protest signs against Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. They announced more protests ahead of Modi's visit to the United States on 22nd of September. Meanwhile, in Afghanistan, government and the US airstrikes have killed 40 Taliban fighters in the country's northern and western provinces. The Afghan Defense Ministry said 2 senior Taliban commanders, including shadow governor for the northern Samangan province, were among those killed. But the Taliban have denied the killing of the governor. Security officials said more operations will be launched against both the Taliban and ISIS to prevent attacks ahead of the presidential polls on 28th of September. Fighting picked up in Afghanistan after US President Donald Trump cancelled peace talks with the Taliban last week. Afghanistan's former Prime Minister Bulletin says Afghan forces do believe the conflict in the country is a holy war. He said youngsters are joining the fighting due to the economic constraints and poverty. Speaking in Kabul, the former politician said over 300 Afghan national defense and security members are killed every day. He said the current Kabul government is the biggest hurdle in peace and as it is unhappy in the continuation of war. Calling on the Taliban, he said the group should continue talks with Afghans after the failure of their dialogue with the United States. Meanwhile, presidential spokesman Siddiqui has asked Hikmat Diyar to apologize to the Afghan forces for his remarks. Taliban have revoked their ban on the International Committee of the Red Cross in Afghanistan. The group imposed a ban on the ICRC in April over alleged suspicious activities during vaccination campaigns. The Taliban said they will provide security to Red Cross staff doing humanitarian work in areas under their control. The group's spokesman Zabihullah Mujahid in a statement said all of their fighters will pave the way for ICRC activities. The Taliban had also imposed a ban on World Health Organization, but the spokesperson did not refer to the WHO in his statement. Now, fresh clashes between pro-democracy protesters and police have erupted in Hong Kong City near the parliament. Tens of thousands of pro-democracy demonstrators threw bricks and petrol bombs at police. To contain the situation, police are firing water cannon and tear gas to disperse protesters. One water cannon caught fire after being hit by a petrol bomb. Earlier clashes between rival protesters turned violent. Pro-democracy demonstrators gathered outside the British consulate, waved Union Jack flags and demanded UK's support. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees has condemned the mobile phone ban in Rohingya camps by Bangladesh. The United Nations body said the Rohingya should not be subjected to any restrictions which stop them from contacting their relatives. In a statement, UNHCR said Dhaka is responsible for ensuring the security and safety of Rohingya refugees. UNHCR spokesperson Andrej Mahecic said security measures should not impact refugees' access to basic services and rights. Rejecting the statement, Dhaka said there are no restrictions as refugees can contact their relatives whenever they want. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has pledged to bypass parliamentary legislation ruling out a no-deal Brexit. Johnson likened Britain to the Incredible Hulk as it seeks to break free from the EU. Johnson said the UK will break out of the EU's manacles like the green-skinned superhero. He drew parallels between the UK situation in Brexit talks and the frustration felt by the fictional scientist. Johnson has maintained he wants to negotiate a new deal with the EU that does not involve a backstop. Meanwhile, Brexit Minister Stephen Barclay says the United Kingdom is moving towards a deal, though significant work remains to be done. In an interview, Barclay said he is scheduled to meet EU negotiator Michel Barnier on Monday. In another development, ex-Tory Minister Sam Gyimah has switched to the pro-EU Liberal Democrat Party. Moving on, the Syrian government has opened a new checkpoint in the Idlib de-escalation zone to ensure humanitarian aid and as a safe exit for civilians. Russian army official Alexei Bacon said militants from the zone can also lay down arms there. Bacon said the Abu al-Dhuhur checkpoint and corridor will provide medical treatment and vehicles to civilians leaving Idlib. He said a group of militants are still violating the ceasefire as 34 cases of shelling were recorded in Aleppo and Idlib in the past 2 days. Meanwhile, Syrian state media reported militants are stopping civilians from leaving through the Abu al-Dhahar checkpoint. President Donald Trump has discussed the possibility of a defense treaty with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The conversation between two leaders took place 3 days before Israeli voters go to the polls. President Trump said such an agreement would further anchor the tremendous alliance between the two countries. He also endorsed Netanyahu's re-election bid by saying he would look forward to continued discussions after Israel's elections. Earlier, Netanyahu pledged to annex Israeli settlements in the Jordan Valley if re-elected. Netanyahu is fighting his second election in 5 months with a potential corruption indictment looming. He suffered a major defeat in April when he failed to form a coalition. The Turkish Foreign Ministry says the OIC will hold a meeting in Jeddah today to discuss Israel's plans to annex areas of the occupied West Bank. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said he would annex the Jordan Valley and other illegal settlements if he wins elections next week. Middle Eastern and EU countries expressed alarm at Israel's intention. Arab foreign ministers also condemned the plan as an act of aggression. They said it would undermine any chances of a peace settlement with Palestine. The Jordan Valley is part of the occupied West Bank that Israel captured in the 1967 war. Tunisians are voting to elect a new president today. 26 candidates, including the current prime minister and a former president, are vying for the top office. More in this report. More news coming up after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now moving on with the news stories. Forensic scientists in Mexico have identified 44 bodies buried in a well in the state of Jalisco. The remains were discovered after local residents complained of foul odor coming from the well. The human remains were hidden in 119 black bags. A local organization has appealed to the government to send more specialists to assist with the identification process. They say the local forensic department does not have the necessary skills to complete the operation. The tropical storm Humberto has lashed the Bahamas with rain and wind. The downpour is slowing down relief efforts on the island, which were recently hit by Hurricane Dorian. Forecasters said the storm is expected to strengthen into a hurricane later today. The U.S. National Hurricane Center said the center as the storm was passing about 50 miles to the east of the Great Abaco Island. It was one of the areas hardest hit by Hurricane Dorian. The Bahamian National Emergency Management Agency says 5 to 10 centimeters of rain is expected in most areas in the next 48 hours. On his arrival in Nassau, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres pledged aid and assistance to the hurricane victims.
I hope that the international community will be able. Now obviously is the moment of still rescue in some situations, but essentially humanitarian aid. But then there will be reconstruction, building resilience, recovery, and this will require massive investments from the government, from the people, and of course international support will be absolutely essential.
Moving on, in Denmark, people have donated over $2.5 million in the world's first ever climate thalathon. The Danes came together to raise money for planting 1 million trees in the Scandinavian country. The fundraising event was described as the first of its kind to focus on climate. For every donation of $3, 1 tree will be planted. 20% of the funds raised will go to the forest conservation efforts in Denmark and abroad. The plantation drive seeks to reduce the escalating concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Singapore's air quality has deteriorated to unhealthy levels for the first time in 3 years. The haze threatens to exacerbate a regional dispute over forest fires. The National Environment Agency said the pollutant standard index went beyond the 100 mark. A reading above 100 is considered unhealthy. The environment watchdog said winds were blowing the smog from the forest fires in Sumatra towards Singapore. The air quality also dropped to unhealthy levels in and around Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. Now let's have a look at the weather updates. With the weather update. We come to the end of this bulletin. For more news and updates, keep watching Indus News.